Hello and welcome to the second lecture of Unit 5. In this lecture we will look at how the war expands throughout the whole territory of the American colonies and how other countries get involved, why they get involved. In the last lecture we talked about the Battle of Saratoga and how it was a turning point in the war, and this is why. It is because the Battle of Saratoga allows us to get help from abroad. And abroad means like from a distance or overseas or something like that. So what this means is we are going to get help from other countries, and we get help from other countries because of the Battle of Saratoga, because we win the Battle of Saratoga. That means that's why the Battle of Saratoga is so important. The French were still angry over their defeat by the British in the French and Indian War. The French wanted to get back at the British, so they have been secretly giving aid or help to the Americans. They're doing this secretly because they do not want to publicly support the Americans until the Americans, win a real battle. Like they say, they don't want to back the Americans and then the Americans just lose horribly, and then they'd have to suffer the consequences. The French would as well. So they're waiting for the Americans to win a real battle, and that happens with the win at Saratoga. With the American win at Saratoga, the French publicly recognized the United States' independence and formed an alliance with the Americans. That means that not only do we get the French help, the French also get their allies involved in helping us, because when you have alliances, you expect your ally to help you out when you are in a battle, and now the French are in a battle, so they expect their allies, and that would be the Spanish. So now we have the French and the Spanish helping us out in this war. So now the British are fighting the Americans, the French, and the Spanish all at once, and this means that the British troops are now very spread out all over North America. Because originally they would be maybe fighting some battles here and here and here and over here, but they really only had to worry about this general area. But now what this allows to happen is that the French are going to be coming, and so are the Spanish, over from Europe and able to attack these ports on the east coast, and then the Spanish over here in the green are able to enter into the frontier from this direction. So the British are very spread out all over the place. Now they're going to be having to fight battles over here and and in the middle, all over the place. So they are being spread out. They're being worn too thin. It's the have you ever made homemade pizza, and you have your dough, and then you have a pan, and if you want to make the pizza the same size as the pan and you don't have enough dough, you're trying to stretch it all the way out to all of the edges, but you form these weak spots, these holes, because it gets too thin, because you're wearing it too thin. That's the same thing with these troops. They're being pushed out all over the place, and what's going to happen is eventually there's going to be weak spots in the dough, if you will. So, yeah. In late 1777, George Washington and his troops were forced to retreat from Philadelphia, and he sets up camp at Valley Forge. On the way to Valley Forge, the American troops lacked supplies, and when they got to camp, things did not get any better. They lacked supplies because of the same thing that we talked about earlier in Lecture 1. The Congress cannot supply this army because they do not have any money, and they do not have any money because they lack the power and the authority to collect taxes and make laws. So if they can't collect taxes, they can't get any money. That means they can't buy any supplies for this army. These are supplies like food and blankets and even shoes. They're marching through the ice and the snow, and if you've ever been at home on a snow day and you've gone outside in your bare feet and stood in the snow for a little while just to see how long you can stay out there, you realize that it hurts your feet really bad because it's so cold. Now these people are marching for miles and miles and miles, not just standing out on their porch in the snow. So their shoes wear out, and that's why they have bare feet, and they can't buy new shoes. They can't get new shoes because Congress cannot supply that for them. So their feet get cuts and they start bleeding, and then they get infected and frostbite, and then you have to cut your leg off, and it's just horrible, horrible, terrible situations. The winter of Valley Forge is one of the greatest hardships ever faced by American troops. Mainly just it's so cold, they didn't have any supplies. They just didn't have anything, really. There is one positive thing to come from Valley Forge. The American Army was able to train under foreign army officers. One of these is German Army officer Baron von Steuben. He transformed an inexperienced American army into a skilled fighting force, which they're going to be better at those traditional battles and more discipline. He is very strict. He instills discipline in the American troops, and they become a better fighting force. Frontier fighting. In 1778, George Rogers Clark led a group of frontiersmen to a fort called Kaskaskia in an effort to expand the war even more, to spread the British out even more, spread that pizza dough all the way until there's just holes in the British forces. They capture Kaskaskia. He marches farther on, and they capture even more forts, and they are forcing the troops once again to spread out even farther. Just to show you how far away we are, or how far west we are, this is the Mississippi River right here, and this is the Missouri River right here. So where they intersect would be St. Louis. So this is St. Louis, and this is where we are in Washington. So we are very close to some of these battles that are happening in the Revolutionary War. War on the waves. The Americans did not have a very large navy, so instead they would encourage privateers to attack British merchant ships, ships carrying supplies for British troops. They would hire these privateers, and they would expect them to go out and stop these merchant ships from getting supplies to the Americas to help the British troops. A privateer is a privately owned ship that would have been granted permission by a wartime government to attack an enemy's merchant ship. This is basically a pirate with a piece of paper. It's a legal pirate, if you will. He gets to go out, attack as many ships as he wants, take as much stuff as he wants, and it's all right because the American government said it's all right. Even though it was a small navy, the Americans did have many victories. The most famous of these victories is an effort led by John Paul Jones, who is the father of the U.S. Navy. John Paul Jones sailed 4 ships to attack British forces along the coast of England itself. He goes over, actually sails all the way to England and attacks these ships. He, ends up, he has to take over one of the British ships because his ship is sinking, and the British surrender, and they surrender, and they have the only ship left that stands. So it's like all of his ships sink, but he still wins because he takes over all the other ships. So it's kind of like one of those, just kind of crazy, courageous, daring stories, and John Paul Jones, big naval hero. He was successful, which angered the British and inspired the Americans, but even with these victories on the waves, the Americans knew that the war had to be won on land, and that's what we look at in Lecture 3, more of the land-based battles and kind of like all the way to the conclusion of this war. So that's Lecture 2, and looking forward to Lecture 3.